U.S. Modernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
I'm Peter Gluck with Gluck Plus Architects, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. When we hear about a modernist house by an important architect being bought and destroyed, well, there's widespread outrage. Why didn't these people try to save the houses? Why didn't the buyers consult architectural historians? The owners should be forced to do whatever it takes and whatever it costs to keep the houses intact, right? It's a classic struggle between property rights and preservation ideals. Turns out, though, that some of those dastardly owners actually followed the rules, got the approvals, met with the committees, consulted the historians, and still got attacked by the preservation community. Today, we talk with Ross Johnston. He's owner of the Largent House in San Francisco, designed by Richard Neutra, and with Mike and Nina Marco, owners of the Biggs House in Delray Beach, Florida, designed by Paul Rudolph. Later on, music with the lovely Susannah Clifford Blachly of Adamant, Vermont. And now, your host, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Contrary to press reports, the Richard Neutra designed Largent House in San Francisco and the Paul Rudolph designed Biggs House in Delray Beach, Florida, are only somewhat gone, and the Biggs House will return close to the original after taking it down to the steel. There are two schools of thought on these modernist reincarnations. One school believes that current building codes force recreation of houses to the original designs to be substantially different buildings, disloyal or irreverent to the original architect's intentions. Another school of thought believes that with a faithful remake, as in the Biggs case, the effect of building codes can be managed, and a house will look essentially the same as the original and function even better with improved materials, preserving modernism and the architect's legacy in that community for decades longer. When the long-ago destroyed Barcelona pavilion by Mies van der Rohe was rebuilt in Spain in the 80s, critic Paul Goldberger said, "This building is not supposed to exist." Philip Johnson said, "The problem before us is, should a dream be realized or not?" The public, however, outside of the architecture and preservation community, doesn't seem to care about the debate, as the pavilion's recreation is close enough and still brilliant. Tens of thousands got to experience the magic of Mies in Barcelona, most for the first time, because of the rebuild. What's the surest way to preserve a modernist house that you love? Get the owner to obtain a preservation easement. That's like a homeowners association for one house. It is the only legal protection available in most jurisdictions, and like a homeowners association, the preservation easement rides with the deed into the future and protects the house from changes. Longtime modernists are still mourning the Luella Maslon House, a Richard Neutra gem in Rancho Mirage, California. Maslon, like many modernist homeowners, did not get a preservation easement, and after her death in 2002, the house was sold to someone who promised to restore it, but shortly after closing, destroyed it. Creating awareness and use of preservation easements is the most effective path to modernist preservation, because after something's sold, you typically can't save it from the intentions of a new owner. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
It's episode 9 in our made-up space saga. Princess Angela Roll is still missing. Dashing pilot and part-time roofer Bjarke Shingles and Lord Vader's orthodontist son Brad land in Port Calatrava, still under construction and over budget on the vegan homeworld of soy, trading forbidden In-N-Out burgers on soy with the planet's leading drug dealer, Kyle. Bjarke and Brad receive the location of the princess imprisoned on an Imperial battlecruiser orbiting SETI Alpha 6. That's never good. Arriving at SETI Alpha 6,
Try the eel.
our heroes first stop in for a tasty breakfast at Khan's Waffle House, where the eggs are served cold. Then they beam into the battle cruiser and fight their way into the brig with their laser fingers, playing Enya, singing Only Time into the ship's PA system. They mesmerize the Imperial crew and escape in a fighter that looks just like Breuer's Wassily chairs and are equally as comfortable. The Emperor threatens to burn the last known copy of Architectural Record unless the Modernist rebels return the princess and stop criticizing the Empire's awful 5-story gray downtown redevelopment projects. But the rebels keep going because the princess knows the ancient monks of Usum have scanned everything Record ever published. Usum. U-S-M. Get it? Back here on Earth, this century's Angela Roll is your heroine of modernist houses, using her architectural training to specialize in modernist real estate, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to speaking before the Galactic Planning and Zoning Board. Angela Roll is your special modern real estate agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's R-O-E-H-L or 919-995-0550. Mike and Nina Marco live in Delray Beach, Florida. They work on residential projects in South Florida and the Bahamas. In 2018, they were recognized by AIA Palm Beach with a Design and Honor Award for preserving and rehabilitating historic structures in Delray Beach. They bought the Paul Rudolph designed Biggs House and set about to bring it back to its original glory. They filed the forms, got the approvals, started the work, and then things went awry. Here's George talking about that with Mike and Nina Marco.
Hi, Mike. Welcome to the show.
Good, George. Thanks for having me.
You and your wife, Nina, have been working in development for quite some time, and I understand you won an award from AIA Palm Beach at one point.
We did win an award back in 2018, and ironically, it was for another historic house that we totally reconstructed. It was what you'd call a Florida vernacular wood frame house built in the 1930s that we basically restored all the original design. And it ended up being a beautiful project. We got an award for it. And like I said, ironically, because the same things we did on that house, as far as replacing glass, siding, roof, some of the stud walls, and we got an award for it. On the current project we're doing, which is the reconstruction of a Paul Rudolph house, doing the exact same steps, they issued a stop construction order because they didn't understand how it applied to the Paul Rudolph house.
Well, let's step through that. Let's start with, when was it that you purchased the property there?
Well, the property, I think, as you know, was designed by Paul Rudolph back in 1955, was built in 1955-56. It was a classic example of his tropical modernism style that he really was at the forefront of in the 1950s. So it's a modern house, a true modern house, not a fake modern house like you see a lot of the architects design nowadays. It was designated historic by the city of Delray Beach in 2005, and we bought it in 2018 at the point where no one really had lived in the house for a number of years. So it was kind of in dilapidated condition back in 2018.
And what was the next step? I assume there were some procedures or commissions or forms or something you had to go through.
Right. So 2018, we bought the house. The procedure in Delray Beach is when it's locally designated historic, you go to the City of Delray Beach Historic Preservation Board. You give them an application, which is called a Certificate of Appropriateness, which details what you're going to do with the house. They review it. It's presented at a meeting of a board, a 7-member board, which happened in May 2019, about a year after we bought the house. Our plans were approved. When the Historic Preservation Board approves your plans, then you take those plans to the local building department. The local building department reviews it, sends it back to the historic department to make sure what you're submitting for a building department matches what Historic Preservation Board approved. Went through the whole procedure. They issued a building permit to us and approved our building permit in early 2020.
And so at that point, what happened? Did you start tearing away the additions on the house?
Well, the additions, the non-historic additions, which were made back in 1980 and in 2007, we had already got a demolition permit to remove those because they weren't part of the historic house.
So they were gone already.
They were gone. So what we were left with is basically the remnants of the original house, which is a steel-supported steel structure, basically an elevated box on this steel structure. But like I said, it was in dilapidated, very poor condition. So our plans called for putting in all new impact glass, replacing the louvers that were on top of the glass. There was some rotten siding, very small amount of rotten siding, and replacing the roof. And those plans were approved. And we took them to the building department. We got a building permit. We started the work in March 2020.
And so at this point, everything's cool with the city. You're proceeding as planned, no problem.
Or so we thought at the time. So the first thing that happened is, and again, when you go into these historic houses, I'm sure you know, there's a lot of things that
you always find something. Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know. So almost immediately, within a matter of days of getting the building permit, we're raring to go, and we start clearing away debris from the base of the house, and we find that the steel columns, which are sitting on pilings, the pile cap plates and the base of the steel columns are completely corroded to the point where our structural engineer said, you can't build with those columns in that condition. You have to cut out the corroded steel. You have to weld back in replacement steel before you proceed. So this is March 2020. It's right when the pandemic hit. Who knows? We don't even know what's going to happen in the world tomorrow or the next day. But we call in a crew to lift and support the house so we can cut out the steel at the base of the columns, replace it with new steel so we can go to the next step in our construction.
And how many columns are we talking about here that hold the house up?
There's basically 4 columns. So if you can imagine 4 columns sticking up at the house, and then the actual elevated structures on top of those 4 columns, basically the steel column and steel beam structure.
Okay.
There's no other structure to the house. So when we lift up the house and we want to reset the elevation of the house at the exact same point where it was, we see that the elevation of the house is not where we thought. We thought the elevation of the house was 6 feet. And elevation is very important in Florida. This is in a coastal area, approximately 1 block from the beach, a matter of a few feet from the intercoastal, or right between the ocean and the intercoastal. It's very susceptible to coastal flooding, rising sea levels, and all that. So elevation's very important. But we wanted to keep the house at the existing, what we thought was the existing 6 feet. We didn't want to have to start cutting out steel and lifting the house, but it turns out we did have to cut the steel. So the next step is we find out the house is not at 6 feet, it's actually at 5.5 feet. 5.5 feet is really a dangerously low elevation in that part of coastal Florida. It's below the FEMA base flood elevation, which is 6 feet. It's below the building code. The building code is 6 feet plus a foot, which is 7 feet. So we said, okay, we can't leave the house at 5.5 feet. Let's go to the code for new construction, which is 7 feet.
Yeah.
So basically, we cut out all the damaged, corroded steel at the base of the column. We weld in new steel that's 1.5 feet higher, and we raise the house to 7 feet. We had to make this decision in real time, literally while the house is up in the air. If we don't make that decision right then and there, we don't know when these workers are going to come back. If they're going to come back, we don't know what's going to happen at that point. So we make a decision in real time. And we figured we could justify it later because we had information from the building department saying we should be building at 7 feet. They wanted us to build at 7 feet. So we said, okay, let's build at 7 feet. So we did that. We raised it to 7 feet. We put in our pilings, our concrete foundation.
Now, at this point, is the house still intact? It's not down to the beams? It's still basically together?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, the structure is still there. I asked my engineer, what's holding this house up? Because like I said, it was in terrible condition. And he said, gravity. I said to my contractor, the engineer's telling me gravity's holding this house up. Is that right? He goes, no. What's holding this house up is termites holding hands. So between gravity and termites holding hands, that's what's holding this house up.
So I have a hard time, Mike, putting up one of those pop-up tents that has 4 legs. And I'm trying to, put it together by myself. So how do you raise a house 1.5 feet? Is it one corner at a time? Do you raise the whole thing? How does it work?
There's specialized companies who do this. They call it cribbing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with cribbing is, but basically they take these pieces of wood and they layer them almost like you would do like one of those, what do they call that kid's game? Jenga or something?
Jenga.
Yeah. So they basically have these Jenga piles of wood crisscrossing at all four corners of the house. And then they use these hydraulic pumps, I guess, or motors to raise the house up. As they raise it, they slide more wood underneath it till they get to the point where the house has been raised about 18 inches. Once the house, well, before they do this, they slice off the steel at the bottom because you can't lift the house while it's attached to steel, obviously.
Right.
So they cut the steel at the base, at the pile caps. They lift the house with these hydraulic pumps and the wood cribbing. The house is literally sitting up in the air. And like I said, that's when we discovered, okay, this house is not at 6 feet. It's barely safe at 6 feet. It's definitely not safe at 5.5 feet. We got to go to 7 feet. And we have to decide this while the house is literally up in the air. There's nobody to call. There's nobody. This is March 2020. There's nobody in any city offices. There's nobody working. There's nobody you can talk to. So I follow the advice of my architect, my engineer, my contractor, the chief building official at the building department, the plan reviewer at the building department. All of them said, you have to go to 7 feet. And
right, because that was a requirement of the building code.
Right.
So now you have a house in the air, 1.5 feet taller than it was before, right?
That's right.
And what happens next?
So all those people, agreed and we should do 7 feet. Unfortunately, the historic preservation staff, we did not tell them in advance because we didn't know in advance. We didn't apply in advance to change the elevation from what we thought was 6 to 7. So they weren't aware we were doing it until after we did it. We weren't hiding it. We went over it with the city. We filed all our paperwork with the city, but the Historic Preservation Board wasn't aware. So, and they didn't actually get involved in the elevation issue till months later. What's important is when we raised the house, the important thing is we're also going to raise the grade because we wanted to keep all the original proportions, dimensions, ceilings, heights, all the spatial relationships of the original house. We didn't want to just lift this thing up a foot in the air and have something different than what was there, than what Paul Rudolph designed. I think you've seen a lot of these historic houses. I've seen articles like in Charleston, South Carolina, for instance, or many other areas. They just lift the whole house up 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, and it's sitting there and it just doesn't look right. It's not the original design. So what we did is, in order to maintain the original design of building on grade, we were stepping up the grade all around the house, so the house would still appear to be on grade, and all the dimensions, proportions would be the same as Paul Rudolph designed it.
So when does the city start to get upset about all this?
Okay, so what happened next is we proceeded. This is in March 2020. We got all the way till July 2020 till we got to the point where, okay, all our foundation is in. We had to put 121 pilings in this property to support this house. In coastal Florida, you have to do all this. So there's a lot of pilings. There's concrete work. The slab is in. Everything's done. So the next thing is, okay, we got to start reconstructing this house. So in our plans, it called for all new glass. It called for new louvers on top of the glass. What a lot of people don't understand is in this house Paul Rudolph designed, it's basically a glass house. Almost all of the walls are glass. So we had to take out the old glass to put in the new glass. Same thing with the siding. Small sections of siding that were rotten, you have to take out the siding to put a new siding. We had to take out the old roof to put in a new roof. But what people don't understand is when all those things are removed, when you remove the glass, when you remove the siding, when you remove the louvers, you remove the roof, there's nothing left. You're looking right through the house, basically. There are no structural walls on this house. The whole rear of the house is glass. You take out the old glass, there's no wall left. There's nothing. The glass is not set in walls. The front of the house, the majority of that was glass. And by the way, the previous owner had changed the design of that glass from the original, changed the louvers, changed the siding. So it was not the original design. It had to be removed anyway to put in the new glass. So again, I'm sure you're familiar with the Philip Johnson glass house.
Oh, sure.
The Mies van der Rohe, Farnsworth house. These are glass houses. And these are museum pieces. Nobody lives in them. But imagine if you had to take out the glass because somebody wanted to live in that house and put in new impact glass to code. The code is very strict and very specific in Florida. You have to have impact glass. You cannot rebuild the house with the original glass from 60 or 70 years ago. You have to put in new glass. So imagine those glass houses, you take out the old glass and someone stops you before you put in the new glass. What are you going to see? Nothing. There's nothing there. So what happened is in July, we took out all these old materials. And that's when the Historic Preservation Department, evidently some people complained who weren't familiar with the project. They complained. And I think, as you know, also when you start dealing with multiple city agencies, a Historic Preservation Board, a building department, and then you have people from the public outside that don't know what they're looking at, they said, okay, you demolished the house. You demolished the house and you didn't have a permit to demolish the house, and we're going to issue a stop construction order. So that happened in August of 2020.
Okay. So here we are in August of 2021. What's happening in this last year to move this forward?
Well, if you told me in August of 2020, I'd still be here in August 2021 waiting for something to happen, I'd say, you're crazy. But here we are. We're actually right almost exactly a year later. What happened is after going back and forth with the Historic Preservation Board, their position is I didn't make my plans clear that I was going to demolish the house. I said, I didn't demolish the house. I took out the materials that in my plan, it called for new materials, and you approved my plan. They said that wasn't clear to them. And I take them at their word. I'm not finding fault. I don't believe it was clear to them. I don't think anybody visualized. I mean, in hindsight, it's obvious, but I don't think anybody visualized at the time that if you take out the glass, you take out the siding, you take out the louvers, you take out the roof, there's nothing left but the steel structure. It's just not something that we talked about or communicated, although in hindsight, it's pretty obvious.
Well, once that's explained, it would seem like, reasonable people would go, oh, so you're going to put it back the way it was, just with better materials.
Right. And our intention always was, and still is, and it always will be, restore the original Paul Rudolph design. But what was there was not the original Paul Rudolph design. It was some altered version of that. And our plans, I'm not an architect, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a builder. But my architect, my engineer, my builder, and another architect that I retained just to review my plans all said, yes, it's in your plan. They approved your plan. But like I said, it wasn't clear to them. So here we are a year later. What's happened is I had to resubmit my plans, and the city authorized a third-party outside expert architect.
Okay.
It's R.J. Heisenbottle Architects in Coral Gables, Florida. They're very well-known, very well-regarded expert historic architects.
Yeah.
They're actually reviewing my plans now as we speak, basically to make sure what I did was justified. So I had to give them a justification for the demolition, justification for the elevation change, a justification for the reconstruction, all according to very strict standards, the Secretary of the Interior standards to do all of these things. And I believe we comply with it. So I'm expecting and I'm hoping and I'm optimistic that the outside architect will approve our plans. At that point, it's going to go back to the City Historic Preservation Board. I'm hoping we can go back. They meet once a month. I'm hoping we can get back for the September meeting and they'll approve my plan and then I can proceed. But there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't know.
Does the Historic Preservation Board at this point, do they understand now that there's no malice here, that you're not going to be building a Wendy's on the spot? I mean, that it's not some crazy scheme to destroy the Paul Rudolph legacy?
I think that they know everything I did was justified. I think what their position is that I didn't communicate it to them adequately.
Okay.
And they weren't aware that when we removed all these materials, it literally happened within a matter of hours because there was nothing holding together. There was no structure except for the steel. So when something happens overnight like that, and there's a house there one day and the next day it looks like I demolished the house, they probably got a lot of outside pressure. How did you allow that to happen from people who aren't familiar with the project? But I think they know I'm not trying to do anything. I didn't intentionally try to do anything behind anybody's back. I was following the plan. If you give our set of approved plans to any contractor, the same thing would happen.
Sure.
There's no other way to do it. There's no other way to restore the original design without reconstructing the house. To reconstruct the house, you got to take it apart first. So I think they know that. Their complaint is the process, the way I did it. And that's why I'm saying, okay, resubmit your plans to get an approval for this after the fact. In other words, almost making believe I didn't do what I did, but to get approval for it ahead of time, but it's already done. I don't think their issue was that. Their issue was I didn't do it through them with their advanced knowledge, and they weren't clear. Of course, my answer is, well, I didn't know you weren't clear. I submitted plans. I say, if you weren't clear, call me in, before you give me the okay to go, and then we can explain it.
So if you can start construction again this fall, how long do you think it'll take to bring it back to its full glory?
I'm hoping from the time I start, I can finish it in 9 to 12 months.
The renderings that you have posted about this look fantastic.
I mean, we really put a lot of effort into making it as close as possible to the original design. The architect who I have, Jeffrey Silverstein, actually has a link back to Paul Rudolph in the sense that Paul Rudolph's partner in Sarasota, Florida, originally was Ralph Twitchell.
Sure.
Ralph Twitchell and Paul Rudolph were the forerunners of the Sarasota School of Architecture. And Jeffrey Silverstein had some relationship with Ralph Twitchell, who was a contemporary and associate of Paul Rudolph. So we've really done a tremendous amount of research and work and expense into making these plans as close as possible to the original design. I've spent a tremendous amount of time and money preserving the most important part of the existing structure, which is the steel structure. The steel structure was in terrible shape also, but we did a lot of repair work, welding work, sandblasting, priming, painting, so that the steel structure is safe. I mean, that's the most important thing in my mind here. We want to bring back the original design, but we also want to build a house that's safe. We're planning on living this house. It's going to be a family home. It's not a development project to sell. It's not a museum piece that nobody lives in. We're trying to build it so we can live in the house. It's built to code. It's safe. We have a lot of environmental challenges in Florida where with the salt air, the humidity, the hurricanes, the coastal flooding, rising sea levels. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of people out there that say, wait, you shouldn't have done anything. You shouldn't have changed it. You shouldn't have touched it. But I don't think that's realistic. Some people say you really can't reconstruct these historic houses because if you reconstruct them, you have to do them to code. And if you do them to code, it's no longer historic. And I don't agree with that. I think that if there's any future for historic preservation, people have to be able to build a house to code that they feel safe in, it's habitable, and people actually live in it. There's other Paul Rudolph houses in Sarasota that are beautifully restored and reconstructed. I think you're familiar with the Umbrella House.
Yes.
The Cocoon House, beautifully restored and reconstructed, but nobody lives there. They're museum pieces. So to me, that's not historic preservation.
Mike, you and Nina, I assume that you're taking lots of photos and videos of this.
Yes.
And didn't you all get close to being in one of the HGTV shows at one point? This sounds like a good story for them.
It wasn't with this project. It was just something we were pursuing just based on what I call our normal projects. The historic projects are not normal projects. They're really a labor of love.
They are.
So
we're passionate about it.
And you have to be passionate about the architect, about design, to go through, the time, the money, the stress to do these historic houses. That's something we underestimated, even though we've done them before. But this particular one, it'll probably be about 5 years from the time we purchase the house to the time, hopefully, when we can complete it. So that's a long time.
That voice you hear in the background is Mike's wife, Nina. Say hi, Nina.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, good. What has it been like from your perspective of going through this journey of historic renovation?
Difficult.
Yeah?
Only because we do work a lot in historic, but this is a personal project for us. It's a family home. So it's been hard. And, our whole intention was for us to create this beautiful home of Paul Rudolph, bring it back to its original integrity. And I just feel like we've been left and right, people just not understanding exactly what we were doing, because what was there was not the original home. All the siding had been replaced, the roof had been replaced, the louvers were replaced, It was given historic designation, but I don't know how that happened. So all we were trying to do, because we're so passionate about this house and Paul Rudolph, was just bring it back to look exactly like he intended it to look like. We actually found plans in the home of the add-on of the glass from Paul Rudolph. We have his original
That's
draft.
great.
We have a lot of that. So we actually took that and said to Jeffrey Silverstein, look what we found. Mr. Rudolph had planned on doing this for the original owner. Let's do this. And that's why the glass, you do see the glass in the new construction that we're doing. Mike and I are passionate about this. We're not giving up.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because besides being a labor of love, it's a lot of hard work and a lot of expense to turn these houses around. It's a lot easier, to be honest, to just mow them down and do something else. But I just want to thank the two of you for keeping the Rudolph spirit alive down there in Delray Beach.
Thank you.
Yes. Actually, by the time this airs, we're putting together website 212seabreeze.com, SEABREEZE, 212seabreeze.com. That'll have the whole story and all the original photographs. We have photographs from 1956 all the way through present, documenting everything. It's really a extremely interesting story. If anybody wants to see it, we'll have it up online.
We actually
shortly.
have his original plans also. So it's interesting.
Nina, Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was George Smart talking with Mike and Nina Marco. The 1935 Richard Neutra designed Largent House is in the Twin Peaks neighborhood of San Francisco. Originally, it was about 900 square feet, but the house was greatly expanded over many decades, clocking in at around 4,000 square feet by the time Ross Johnston bought it around 2017 and got a demolition permit approved. Before that, a historical review determined that, because of all the expansions, the Neutra house was no longer historically significant. When Johnston's contractor found more damage than expected and removed slightly more than the demolition permit approved, the city of San Francisco, and later the press, accused him of destroying a Neutra house without a permit. What should have been a relatively short reinspection and reissue process has lasted into 2021. At one point, the city tried to force Johnston to rebuild the house they had approved to demolish, which was kind of unprecedented and didn't actually work. Johnston sued the city, a case still in litigation today, as he tries to get his approved and stalled project reapproved. Johnston is no stranger to the nature of public review. He served on the Winter Park, Florida Planning and Zoning Board. Here's George with Ross Johnston.
Welcome, Ross. It's nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's go back to shortly before you bought this house. The previous owner had done a lot of due diligence and work to have the house studied and so forth. So what condition did you receive it in, and what was the status of its historical nature at that time? This was around 2017, right?
That's right. We bought a completely permitted house from 2014 from the city. The city had thoroughly vetted it. San Francisco is very thorough in that process, and it takes a long time, usually 3 or 4 years at this point to get through that process. So every department had looked at it. The Historical Society had analyzed it. It had been deemed by the city historian and all the other related architectural historians not significant, even though it was a Neutra-built house in 1935.
What part of the Neutra was left at this point in 2017?
Just the far end. It was 900 square feet when he built it in 1935. This was a 4,000 square foot house that had a 2,400 square foot indoor pool. It didn't have a functioning kitchen. There were wall-to-wall mirrors. It appeared, from what I could see, to just be a party house. It was really very odd. We couldn't figure it out. The rooms didn't match up. The indoor pool was 2 stories high, and it was about, like I said, over 2,000 square feet. None of it made architectural sense. The building caught on fire in the early 70s and had significant remodel based on that. There were still charred wood that we found once we got into the demolition. So this house had been worked on multiple times, and the Architectural Society had come to that same conclusion and had given a permit for a brand new, similar sized single family residence in the 2014 permit.
So there was no requirement to preserve anything or keep anything at that point?
Not at all.
Okay. So you bought the house. What happened next?
We tried to look at what was made sense at the permit that we had bought and the site that we had bought. We contacted the architect who had designed the permitted house, and we brought him on board to help us. We had a couple of minor modifications, and then we were moving through with the demolition portion of the process. The general contractor who was there working on that came across, in San Francisco, you have to get demolition permits, but the world has changed in San Francisco since 2014 and 16 and 17. They did have some bad demolitions. And so to their credit, they have to clamp down on that. But they issue kind of percentage of demolition permits in San Francisco. So 60, 70, 80, 90%. And we were allowed to demolish up to about 80% of the house, 85% of the house. And there were some weight-bearing walls that had damage from the 1969 fire that our GC took down. So we probably went, we think, from about 75% to about 85% demolished. There's still 15, 20% of the house is still standing today.
Okay.
It's behind a fenced-in wall. And it was a degree of interpretation. And he stopped at that point in time. And then we went, to the city officials to say, what do we do at this point? And then you got thrown into this complete abyss of city government, where they said you needed to cancel the permit to get a refund. You had to start over. It was bad advice given to a number of people who didn't really understand what was going on. And then we had to, in essence, kind of reroute this back through the city commission, which, if you've ever gone through the San Francisco City Commission, you find out that it's kind of a crapshoot as to how that's going to turn out. And that's what happened to us. We were the wrong people at the wrong place at the wrong time. We actually ran into a war between Department of Planning and Department of Building in San Francisco. And one agency was bent on teaching the other one a lesson. We were just a scapegoat in this case. I mean, if you're talking about a 10% over demolish of a project, that usually just requires on-site remediation. You go in, you talk to the Department of Building, you go back out, they tell you what you need to do, you fix it in the field, and you move on. It's a simple process. This one got political. It got out. We didn't quite understand what was going on because we were not privy to understand that this was a personal war between the two departments in San Francisco. And nothing we could have done probably could have saved us at that point because procedure was not followed. But we ended up getting railroaded through that process.
You've got the house, you're doing demolition. You find you've got to demolish it a little more than you expected because some things are broken or rotted or damaged or whatever.
Right.
And then you get thrown into this bureaucratic mess. When this eventually hits the news, though, it gets shown as this bad boy destroying a Neutra. How did it go back into being declared a historical house again when it had been ruled otherwise early on?
Because the city commission, which is an unelected board, it's an appointed board, and there's not a single builder nor a single engineer on it, decided they were going to punish me and open us in open commission. They said, you've got to return it to the 900 square foot Neutra house from 1935. That was the ruling. And put up a plaque acknowledging that we had made a mistake. I mean, you think about that, that we had erred and we were bad and all this stuff. And we're sitting there in the audience thinking, are you kidding me? We're listening to this. You can go back and look at the transcripts. You can look at the video. And everyone, the city attorney, it was just, we were dumbfounded in how this goes about. And again, this was above our head. This was involving supervisors. We were just the sacrificial lamb here. And we were just running across a couple of turf wars in San Francisco. So if you apply rational thought and process here, it doesn't apply, unfortunately.
So how did these boards ignore the fact that there was a demolition permit, that there were all these pre-approvals? Did that just go out the window in this new turn of events?
Yeah, it went out the window because our architect had power of attorney to sign on our behalf, and we were submitting permits. That's what you do. Well, they went down there with kind of an admin, and they told her she had to sign this piece of paper to get a refund. That's what they were doing. But that piece of paper actually canceled the permit. It did two things. Gives you a refund, but it cancels the permit. And as soon as that permit was canceled, we were in real trouble because then you had to start all over again. And then we were told to work with the San Francisco Planning Department to work this out, which we did. We went with the city attorney, the head of planning, several other people, $15,000, $20,000 in architectural designs and architectural plans redesigned to try to get this into a format that they would agree to. We had the city attorney agree to it. We had all of planning agree to it. We took it into the commission and they blindsided us again. This time they took what was a 4,100 square foot house, single family house, which was basically exactly what we had bought. And they said, you only get 3,200 square feet, basically 3,100. It actually turns out to be about 2,800 square feet. And you have to put an ADU in it. And so this was at the advent of the ADU phenomenon. And I don't know how much you know about it or focus on
it in the country. The accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, the accessory dwelling units it wasn't pioneered in San Francisco, but I think it started to advance in California pretty quickly. And we were on the forefront of that. But you do take a valuation hit when you add an ADU. And that takes up some of your square footage. And then in San Francisco, of course, that even gets political because then they'll say you need a below market rate ADU. And so they cap you on what you can charge for that. And so from a single family house, all of a sudden, you now have, in essence, a duplex. And you then have to change the whole model. And what people have found is with too many ADUs in San Francisco, because your building cost can be $700 a square foot there, and your sales price are maybe $1,100 or something like that, $1,200. You say if you lose 1,000 to 1,100 square feet, that could be $1.5 million in lost revenue. It's not immaterial when they change something by 1,000 square feet. But if you add an ADU and it has a below market rate structure in it, it can make the whole, the build side, if you're building at $700 a square foot out there, or $600 or whatever you are, the rent that you now have to collect from an ADU, because in essence, you can't sell it. An ADU has to be attached to the main unit itself. It can't be detached. It can't be sold separately.
I understand, but let me see if I'm clear here. Are they asking you then to build an ADU that you're supposed to then rent out to somebody, or is it just supposed to be like a guest house for the property?
Oh, no. It has to be a separate entity. You can't join them together. Yes, not a guest house. It's supposed to be an entirely new renter who pays the buyer rent. You see what I mean? Does that make sense?
So it's like just adding an investment unit in your backyard. It's not designed for your own family.
Right. But what it does is it cuts out that square footage from your original house. Okay. And the original house per square foot is worth 1,100, 1,200, 1,300 square foot. And an ADU is worth $600, $700, or $800 a square foot. Do you see the difference?
In San Francisco, are they trying to force people to build ADUs? Because I know in other jurisdictions, they're banning people from building ADUs in their backyards. They're
absolutely requiring not one, but two. And this is a California state law. You should really look into this. It's crazy. I'm thinking, I'm talking off the cuff here, and I'm sure I'm anecdotal, but they're trying to do away with R1 in California. They really want anywhere that there's R1 zoning to be R2 inclusive, maybe even R3, which means you bought in a gated community close to the coast in California, and you assume that they're all going to be single family homes. Well, the person next door could put up a duplex, or they could put up a quad. They could put up a triplex or something like that under California law. R1 is being severely restricted up and down the coast, and it's going to move inland. I think it's going to affect a lot of the coast in high rent areas. But San Francisco is trying to push back. I know in certain places in the outer Richmond and the Sunset, where it's all single family homes. If you visited there, you know what it looks like. It's just row upon row of single family homes. But that's exactly the area that they would say, well, now you have to put in an ADU, or if you don't, it has to be a duplex because R1 may not be an option there next year. That's where this is headed.
So initially, they wanted you to rebuild the Neutra design and put up a plaque of shame.
Yeah.
And then when that plan fell apart, they wanted to take your basically already approved design that you negotiated with the Planning Commission and reduce that. So at what point did you just kind of say, to hell with this, I've got to sue somebody?
That was right then. And we waited too long to do that. We trusted them. We trusted the city attorney had any sway or any control over the unelected commission. I mean, when you're listening to the city attorney telling you, well, this is what we need you to do. We did it. We paid an architect to do it. We made the modifications they requested. You expect that when you go into commission that they have talked. And I knew they had talked. They had meetings. And we just assumed that this was kind of one of those things where it was a negotiated settlement. We go in there and they did the same thing they did the first time. They just kind of go down this line of thought that nobody thought they would do. They made up the number at 3,200, but that included a garage. So that's 2,800. You're losing 1,200 square feet at $1,300 a square foot. That's $1.5 million of lost revenue that they just arbitrarily decided. There was no law, no ordinance, no comps, no neighborhood input. The Historical Society will weigh in, but these aren't people that even live in the neighborhood. Why the Historical Society was even there made no sense because it wasn't designated a historically significant or protected house. That was debunked by even the newspaper debunked that. You can look it up in the San Francisco Chronicle. When they started, J.K. Deneen looked at it and he saw that it wasn't protected. It was just kind of made up by the commissioner who decided to punish us the first time, who said it was historically protected, but he was wrong and we had no recourse.
When did you first go to court and what happened from that initial set of rulings?
Well, it's been so long now. It's been so many numerous times. We obviously sued to get back to doing this. You look at whether you go federal, if you go or state, and we're in the Ninth Circuit out there in the federal, and we've had some wins. We've been proven that there's unequal treatment, that they treated other rulings differently, that they didn't cancel the permits immediately, arbitrarily, that they did allow on-site field modifications when there was a small amount of over demolition and things like that. So we were treated differently, and the judge agreed that we were treated differently, and that's where it stands today. And it's ongoing litigation, so it hasn't completed itself yet.
Given when your litigation finishes, then what steps do you have to go through or go back through again to actually start construction?
It's a good question. You don't know until you have your settlement that comes from the litigation. Okay. And that'll be determined by then. Then there's a settlement process that has to go through. I'm sure there's public discussion about it. I would imagine there's elected officials who have to weigh in on it. This happens more frequently than you would think in San Francisco because they contest everything. Every single neighbor contests every single development project. Not much goes through easily out there. So that's just kind of the state of where it is. But when litigation ends, you have to see what the outcome is. Then you have to see what the negotiated settlement is. And then you have to see what you can do to actually get to a buildable envelope.
And have you run into anything like this before?
You can't make this up, George. You can't make this up. This is Orwellian. It's a joke. Nobody's like San Francisco. If you just go walk around San Francisco City Hall, you'll realize very quickly you're almost in a different country. It's different there. They see things differently there. It's beyond socialist. It's more, we're the bad guys, the developers. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a landlord or a landowner or developer, or even someone trying to remodel, George, you are the villain. You are scorned, and every neighbor will just oppose you just almost by definition. And I'm not being dramatic. It really is that way. I got to imagine most small people like me just don't want to we leave and we don't ever want to build there again. And then I think the people who are opposing us win, but it doesn't make any sense. And all it does is it creates less housing, less affordable housing, and more problems with homeless and other problems in the city because there's just not a place to hold everybody.
And if I'm getting this correct, there's also great resistance in addition to traditional development to affordable housing development. People don't want that either.
Well, just so you know, and I'll try to help you understand this, Hopkins is perfect. My project hits it all. So if you ask 10 people what they want at Hopkins in the neighborhood, you'll get 10 answers. And I'm not just using hyperbole. You will. We have. I could show you the stack of responses from our lawyers that were sent out to the neighborhood. And some of them came back with more 4-letter words than you can shake a stick at. Okay, so they opposed a 4,000 square foot single family home. as now that's called a McMansion, and that's a legal term they're using now in San Francisco. No more McMansions. It's actually going into the legislation. I think it's called McMansion legislation, really. And I think they're stopping at 3,200 or single family, or maybe it's 2,600. That's all you can do for single family anymore there. Then you can add an ADU and things like that. But the challenge of all this is trying to fit this thing into this envelope. So there's this new legislation going through in San Francisco by the supervisor of our area, Raphael Mandelman, who I've spoken to about this. He's just put forward fourplex legislation on corners. You should look it up. Really, it's very interesting. Where on corners in certain areas that aren't on main transit lines, which is just like our Hopkins, you can put a fourplex where there was a single family residence. And that's, an ordinance or the law or whatever it is. We could do ADUs. We could do a lot of different things there. The problem is, back to your original point, the neighborhood didn't want a decadent 4,000 square foot house, but they don't want a smaller single family house with a below market rate unit ADU either, because they don't want that crowd showing up either on the below market or affordable housing. So that would be opposed.
Would they also oppose the fourplex then?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Yeah, because that is not something for that neighborhood. The Twin Peaks neighborhood is a high-end neighborhood, and it's full of single-family residences. So they oppose everything. I'm not really sure what people want. And we're the developers sitting back going, hey, city, just tell us what you want. We'll do it. We're just sitting here willing to work with them. We're the small guys getting run over.
Ross, once you get the building finished, eventually, are you going to live there? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to rent it out? I mean, what's your plan long-term for the project?
The plan was to move my family back there because I lived there for a long time and loved it. But that went out the window when I realized we have to see what we finally build and if we build. The problem is in the 3 years, George, and sitting in litigation, building costs have gone up $200 to $300 a square foot in the city. If you think about that, that destroys your business model. So while you sit there, and the price did not go up $200 to $300 per square foot. So you have a whole different business model to think about. And we may just sell it because some local people may have a different perspective on it and they may want to do it, or we'll build it. But I doubt I'll live there. But the original intent was that we would live there. So I'm disappointed.
Well, it sounds like you've really been through a lot with this. When do you expect that there'll be any kind of resolution on your court case?
I believe, we hope sometime this year, but more realistically, it's next year. It's kind of as we see this roll through and we get to court, we're actually still working through and we actually we get to trial.
Okay.
And I'm happy to come back and tell you about how it went next year and give you an update.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us the story.
You bet. Thank you, George.
That was George with Ross Johnston discussing the Largent House in San Francisco.
I am so happy to have the charming, talented Susannah Clifford Blachly, a singer-songwriter from Adamat, Vermont, on the show today. By day, she's a licensed clinical mental health counselor with a practice covering a buffet of issues we're all suffering from, including depression, anxiety, trauma, grief, spirituality, transition, parenting, and postmodernism. Musically, she has performed with numerous bands, including Bellatrix, Wagtail, The Gross Domestic Products, sounds economic, and currently Two Shoes Off at venues including the Champlain Valley Folk Festival, the New World Festival, and the Valley Stage Festival. She has 4 CDs, all of original material, and sometimes still, she finds time to be acting at both the Unadilla Theater in East Calais and Shakespeare in the Hills of Plainfield, Vermont. Welcome, Susannah.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So before we get started, Susannah, is there any counseling for modernism? Should I be worried about this condition?
Well, I am a historic preservationist by training. I think you should know that. So I do have a predilection for old buildings.
Yeah.
But, I've pretty much moved from one old farmhouse to another.
And none of them were modernist farmhouses.
No, they're all very old with all the old farmhouse problems.
Susannah, I'm sure the pandemic has increased demand for counseling. Any insights you can share, particularly regarding school-age children? Our rogue archivist, Carrie, has some of these kids and wrote this question.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't see kids anymore, but demand for counseling has skyrocketed. I turn people away multiple times a week. And I think, kids really are suffering. I mean, everybody's suffering, but I especially feel for kids. And my son is a young adult, and it's been a really challenging time.
Do you see parents of kids?
I do, yeah.
How do you help people cope during this time?
Partly it's, staying connected and helping people stay connected with friends and family, and because it's such a isolating time. Primarily what I am dealing with is just people feeling extremely isolated, particularly people who live alone. So just trying to help them stay connected.
And I read that you use songwriting as a therapy.
I used to when I worked with kids. It was a wonderful tool with young kids. It was a great way to get kids who are interested in music to share about something they were struggling with without having to talk about it.
They could sing about it.
They could sing about it. And that seemed to really work and get kids talking.
Would they do this individually, or would it be like in a little group setting? How did it work?
No, I did it individually, and we would just start with a theme and that they wanted to write a song about, and I would help come up with the chords and melody. And then we'd kind of write it together, and then I would record them singing it and let them take home a CD.
Wow.
Of themselves singing the song. Yeah, it was really fun.
Come across any rising stars while you were doing this?
I didn't, but, I haven't kept track of a lot of them, so who knows?
But it worked, you think?
It worked, yeah.
You write all your songs, right?
I do, yep.
They're really beautiful. Tell us about this next one we're going to play called After Rain.
Yeah, so After Rain, I just start my songs with a chord progression and a rhythm, and then the first couple lines come, and that tells me what the song wants to be about. So I don't tend to write songs with much of an idea of what I want to write about. And this one, it just like a lot of my songs, just kind of flowed out. So the melody tends to inform the lyrics.
So you're like one of those sculptors that just imagines a piece of marble and what pieces want to be released from the marble.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I get it. Here's Susannah with After Rain.
After rain, sorrows glisten, pebbles sing, roses swoon. After rain, a cricket's lullaby, a lemon mist beneath a sugar moon. After rain, kisses linger, a crystal vase, violins. After rain, there's always fireflies, the scent of honeysuckle and desire. When the night throws all those bitter clouds away, and a warm vanilla breeze sweeps the sky, let's put all our differences aside and give this love one more try. give this love one more try. After rain, rivers dream, rainbows shiver, a shooting star. After rain, there's always fireflies, the scent of honeysuckle and desire, the scent of honeysuckle and desire.
That is so nice. What is that stringed instrument in the background? Is that a violin, a fiddle, a guitar?
There's a mandolin that's featured.
Okay.
So guitar, mandolin. Yep.
And are you playing either of those?
I'm not. I'm a fiddler pretty exclusively, although now I play the cello too. So I would hire in musicians. And my producer, Colin McCaffrey, also is a multi-instrumentalist, so he would often play all the other instruments if I didn't have a guest.
When you play on stage, do these folks come along with you?
Maybe for a CD release concert, but yeah, generally I would have my band of the time back me up, and then I would play songs that are related to the kind of music my bands play. So with this particular song, I had to be... The Gross Domestic Products was the band I could play this with because they played jazz, which wasn't something I normally did.
Have you figured out a way to work a cello into your songs?
Not well. I could easily. I mean, it's such a gorgeous instrument, and I'm looking forward to the end of the pandemic so I can start backing people up on cello.
You know, we've had a trumpeter singer on the show, but not a cello playing singer yet. That could be the first.
I can't do both at the same time.
Trumpet and cello, or singing and cello.
Singing and cello.
Singing and cello.
Yeah.
This next song, Another Day, did that come before or after Rain?
Trying to remember. I think it was roughly the same time. This was another song where the melody informed the lyrics, and it just became this song about being okay with what is and who I am right in this moment, sort of non-striving.
Well, that is a great message for all of us right now, right?
Right.
Please don't bill us, Susannah, for this therapy session after this is over. Here's Susannah with Another Day.
I went digging in the sand for a life I thought I'd lost, sifting out the solid bone from the glitter and the gloss, trying to find a resting place beneath this troubled sea and discover who it is that I'm really meant to be. But the deeper down I went, the only things that I could find were a cup of devil's brew and a glass of holy wine. And in my thirst, I drank them both, the bitter and the sweet. Maybe simply being human is all that I was meant to be. Light the same white candle for the sinner and the saint, 'cause we all walk single file when we reach that final gate. If we cast off all our differences, there'll be nothing in our way, just the rising of the moon and the dawn of another day. If I walked 1,000 miles in 1,000 other shoes, maybe then I'd see the grace in shrugging off these walking blues. I'd trade in all my searching for the shade of one small tree. Maybe simply being free is all that I was meant to be. What if we awoke to find that this day would be our last? Maybe then we'd view the world through the present, not the past. We'd see angels in our coffee cups and diamonds in the sea. Maybe what we are right now is all that we were meant to be. Light the same white candle for the sinner and the saint, 'cause we all walk single file when we reach that final gate. If we cast off all our differences, there'll be nothing in our way. Just the rising of the moon and the dawn of another day. Just the rising of the moon and the dawn of another day.
Well, I feel better already, actually.
Yeah.
Well, good.
I mean,
that'll be $120.
I'm seeing angels in my coffee cup already. I got it right here.
Who's singing harmony with you? Was that you double tracked?
My good friend Louis Franco, who lives in town, the same town I live in, and and that's one song where I actually do play the guitar because we were looking for something simple.
So you told me before you exclusively play the fiddle, but you also play the cello and you also play the guitar. So not so exclusive, huh?
Well, rarely I play the guitar mostly just to write the songs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Susanna, do you have any festivals this fall in November, December that people can see you perform?
I do not. I mean, I don't, to be honest, with COVID, I just stopped performing and have moved on to other things. So I don't know when I'll be performing again, but it's not going to be for quite some time, unfortunately.
Sometime in 2022, maybe?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
I play with a gal named Patty Casey, who's a really well-known Vermont singer-songwriter. And hopefully, once COVID is over, we will do some of our duo gigs together.
Hit the road?
Hit the road.
Around Vermont and the greater...
Pretty much, that's it, yep. I don't go very far afield, so...
Susanna, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, close us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino, palms outstretched, chakras aligned, open to the amazing universe, researches guest in complete calm and spiritual oneness after hiring Susanna as her therapist. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another If We Build It, Will They Protest edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.